Good afternoon, and welcome to the ISO Board of Governors General Session. Please note that today's call is being recorded, and all attendees have entered in a listen-only mode at this time. There will be opportunity for public comment throughout today's call, and we will give you instructions on how to enter the comment queue at that time. With that, I'd now like to formally begin today's call and turn it over to Chair Severin Borenstein. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Silas. Welcome, everyone. We still have people joining here electronically. This is the Board of Governors General Session, and we have a pretty short agenda today. We will have a report from the governing body chair, particularly now that we are in a step one world of the Pathways Initiative. We will have an item that was primary authority under the WEM governing body that is on our consent agenda that the governing body chair will address. And then we'll move to a briefing on the interconnection process enhancements. And that's probably it for today. We will, of course, have public comments, and you're welcome to join to comment there or elsewhere in the agenda. So I will turn it over for the first item of business, to Roger Collinton for the approval of the minutes, I believe.
Yeah, we'll start with the roll call.
Oh, right.
And then we'll have the check for general public comment, and then we'll do the minutes. So let's do the roll call first so we can officially be on the record here. Chair Borenstein?
I'm here.
You are. Vice Chair Edo?
Here.
Governor Galizova?
Here and present.
And you are a present, a complete gift. Governor Leslie?
Present.
And Governor Shorey?
Here.
Thank you, board, and I'm happy to have you all here and present. We have a full quorum and we proceed. I do have on my list here to mention the public comment process. I think both Silas and Severin have covered that, and that is simply that when we get to the point of public comment, that Silas will seek anyone to raise their hand in Zoom, and we will queue you up. And with that, our first agenda item, since I have the mic, so to speak, is general public comment. And we can, if Silas, if you can check to see if there's any public comment for items that are not on the agenda.
If you would like to speak under general public comment, you can please press the raise hand icon at the bottom center of your Zoom screen. Or if you are dialed into the phone only line, please press #2 on your telephone to enter the comment queue. At this time, we do not have any hands up in our comment queue.
Okay, thank you, Silas. Severin, with your permission, I'll keep going here on onto agenda item number 2, which is a decision on the May 22nd, 2025 general session minutes for the Board of Governors. And can I have a motion to approve those minutes, please?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Governors. That motion passes. And while I am here and still talking, our next item on the agenda is for an update on the primary authority. And again, Chair Borenstein touched upon this, and I wanted to briefly just mention for everyone and kind of walk through a little bit of the primary authority, which, as Chair Borenstein mentioned, is a milestone in the evolution of our governance for what we've called Pathways Step 1 and giving the WEM governing body primary authority position in approving market rules for WEIM and EDAM. And so specifically, this means that the governing body with its primary authority role, rather than the joint authority role, it has the first vote, it has the substantive presentations that are prepared for the governing body. But I want to also note, it's important to note that while the board has a consent agenda on that the board still is fully briefed on all these matters, that the board is provided all the materials at the same time that the governing body has provided those materials and that it is fully engaged on that. And the board's consent agenda is the means in which the board will be satisfying its obligations and fiduciary responsibility in overseeing the organization. From a process standpoint, this really only entails a few changes to what we've been doing. We've typically had 2 or 3 day meeting cycle. Typically it's 3 days with public meetings. This meeting cycle, we do not have a joint meeting, but we've generally maintained a 3-day cycle where the governing body would meet on day 1. The board and the governing body would meet in a joint session on day 2, and we'd have a board only general session on the 3rd day. So we're basically, except for this meeting cycle, planning to maintain that 3-day cycle as necessary and as we have agenda items to be as efficient as possible. And on the day 1, the governing body would exercise primary authority on any items that meet its primary authority. And then if there is a joint authority meeting, or excuse me, I need to call it something different. If there's a joint meeting, then in that meeting, the board and the governing body would get together. There would be as part of that meeting a report out from the governing body chair as to anything that was primary authority, the approval, was there any differences from the presented motion to what was ultimately approved, and then in the 3rd day, or whenever the board only meeting, as today is, the board would have its consent agenda. On the consent agenda, the board has the option of doing basically one of 3 things. It can vote on the consent agenda as is, it can have some discussion about the consent agenda, or it can pull an item off the consent agenda and discuss specifically that item if there's more than one. And it can either vote to approve, it can vote to not approve, and to move into basically a dispute resolution process. And that's part of the trappings for the newness of the pathway. Step 1 is under the dispute resolution process. There would be opportunities, which this part isn't new, opportunities for at least 2 additional stakeholder proceedings for make sure we can try to drive towards consensus for the board and the governing body and fix whatever the concerns the board has. Ultimately, if that cannot be done, this is the new feature. We have a dual filing feature that the governing body and the board could approve the version they believe is the appropriate version of the initiative, and then we would file that at FERC and put that in FERC hands as to what to approve or what not to approve. And I think, I guess the only other thing I wanted to mention at this point, and we can take questions, is that there would be no changes to the stakeholder process leading up to the governing body and the board approval. That process has been in place for quite some time and will remain in place as it is. So with that, let me turn it back to you, Chair Bornstein. If you have any questions or anyone on the board has questions, I'm happy to respond.
That was quite detailed and thorough. I'm happy. Any questions from any of the board members? Okay, then I think we move ahead to the next highlight, which I overlooked in discussing the agenda, the CEO report. The real highlight of the meeting.
Oh, sure. It's all.
Why we're here.
Well, thank you, Chair Bornstein and Vice Chair Edo and Governors. It's great to see you. And Chair Bornstein, I think as we are here now about halfway through the summer of 2025, I would have to say your attire today is probably indicative to a certain degree of the kind of summer we're having, particularly in the Bay Area, where I think they're having we call it a Mark Twain summer, right? It's through the first, it's actually been, conditions have been really quite favorable for grid operations so far across the CAISO's footprint. As I noted in my CEO report, the average temperatures for June have been near normal, with the first part of July through the 9th trending below normal. And quite frankly, it wasn't really until July 10th that we saw our first day of demand above 40,000 megawatts within our balancing authority. So really quite mild conditions, loads and operations have been quite stable. I think generally across the West, there has been some outbreak of heat in a few areas, but I think generally we've had diversified weather diversified resources, good hydro, and things have been generally solid. That said, concerning wildfires, it has been a very active season so far. I think CAL FIRE has confirmed that the 2025 wildfire season is well ahead of last year's pace in both frequency and severity. I thought the statistics that I quoted were really quite telling, that as of the first week of July, we already saw 3,938 wildfires, which compares to 3,339 wildfires over the same time in 2024, and the 5-year average at 3,600. But the actual increase in acres burned is quite stark. This year so far, we'd already seen 182,197 acres burned compared to 76,152 last year, with a 5-year average of just under 46,000. So this has been a very active fire season and something we've had to be watching very carefully. Fortunately, we've had outstanding communication with the utilities, with the fire agencies and others, and I think the grid has proven itself quite resilient. And just in general, so far this year, we've avoided any sort of major disruptions. But we are, of course, only about halfway through summer, and of course, it's typically August and September where we tend to see the greatest grid challenges. So we stay ever vigilant, but as always, appreciate all the communication coordination and continue to appreciate the very solid stack of resource adequacy resources that we've got available to us. As Roger has already done a nice job noting, and yourself as well, that the change to primary authority, that of course was triggered back in early July with the signing of an implementation agreement by Public Service of New Mexico to join the extended day-ahead market. So we're just absolutely thrilled to have PNM officially within the EDAM family. Of course, they serve more than 550,000 homes and businesses across the state of New Mexico. They'll be going online in 2027 and just bring a great additional resource base and transmission connectivity in the desert Southwest. So we're very excited, along with the continued progress that's being made along with the Pattern SunZia line out into New Mexico. So a lot of really exciting developments there in the Pacific Northwest, and we look forward to working with all of you as we move into this next phase of governance evolution. I will just say in passing, of course, although legislature is now in recess, we continue to monitor carefully the developments around Senate Bill 540 and remain encouraged by the level of support and engagement of the stakeholder community on that piece of legislation. I just wanted to note quickly, just touch on congestion revenue allocation. This, of course, was a decision item from our last meeting under joint authority. When both the Board of Governors and the WM governing body approved our EDAM congestion revenue allocation proposal back in June, we acknowledged that this was a short-term adjustment, and we pledged to continue working with our stakeholders on any needed refinements and a more sustainable long-term design. And I wanted just to provide you with the assurance that our team has already started that work and is actually planning to actively engage with stakeholders to evaluate additional enhancements and options for long-term solutions beginning in the October timeframe. So that work is underway. I appreciate all the partnership there. In the meantime, we filed our proposed congestion revenue allocation tariff revisions with FERC on June 19th. And have requested a decision by September 18th. And based off the comments that have come in so far, and I think all the outstanding work of our many partners and stakeholders, we're encouraged and hopeful of a successful outcome on that docket later in September. Also, as we will discuss later today on the consent agenda, we did bring forward yesterday the proposal to extend indefinitely the Western Energy and Balanced Market Assistance Energy Transfer Proposal. As I think we all know, WEIM has really proven itself to be an invaluable reliability tool. And the AET feature is something I think the market participants have really come to appreciate under extreme circumstances. I think Chair Bornstein, as you often note, we tend to focus a lot of attention on the financial and production cost benefits of the EIM. That's over $7 billion. That's real money. But at the same time, I think the reliability benefits of this market, particularly during extreme events, whether it's superheating events in the summer or supercooling events in the winter, have really proven to be invaluable And so there was strong support for extending that. Look forward to additional discussion on that topic later today. Finally, I think, the topic of artificial intelligence is never far from the public discourse nowadays, whether it's looking at what the growth in energy demand from AI means for the electricity grid, or across industries asking ourselves, what does this technology actually mean for the way that we conduct business? As you know, we've had a control center modernization initiative underway the last couple of years to make sure that our control center operators have absolutely the very best tools and techniques available to them to operate our grid as reliably as possible. And last year, we actually conducted an assessment across different parts of our business for opportunities where we might see the applications of artificial intelligence. So we were pleased a couple of weeks ago to announce a new partnership with OATI, Open Access Technology International, who does a lot of work around the administration of transmission and transmission agreements, transmission contracts, and transmission logistics. And we're going to be taking a look at the potential applications of AI with respect to our outage management system. We think there's a lot of room for additional automation and additional error detection, just helping our system operators with even better advanced planning to manage the grid as efficiently as possible. So this pilot will extend across the course of the year. We look forward to seeing how well it pencils out and whether there are further applications. And just in general, we want to make sure that the CAISO is looking in a very informed and thorough way at opportunities for AI applications while being ever conscious of any risks or cybersecurity issues. So excited about that partnership and look forward to reporting out to you at the end of the year on how it pencils out. So with that, that concludes my report for today. Happy to take any questions, but just appreciate all the support and excited for the rest of the meeting today. Thank you.
Any questions from board members? Okay, actually, before we move on to the next item, I had meant to recognize a passing of one of the really most influential people in the California energy system who died earlier in July, Bob Weisenmiller. He was the chair of the California Energy Commission. He was a proud graduate of UC Berkeley and of the Energy and Resources Group, which one of our board members is also. He's somebody I spoke to many times about energy policy. I learned a great deal from him. So I wanted to recognize with sadness that Bob's passing.
Sure. Wonderful person. Thank you.
So let's move on to the new aspect of this of these meetings. Well, not new that we're going to have a report out from the governing body chair, but in this new step one process to discuss the issue that will be on our consent agenda, among other things too. And I want to welcome the new chair of the WEM governing body, Rebecca Wagner. Welcome to our meeting, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Chair Bornstein. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Edo, governors. I'm here to share the latest and greatest from the Western Energy Markets Governing Body. And before I get started, I do want to acknowledge the passing of Bob Weisenmiller and the instrumental role he played in the transitional committee that ultimately created the governance structure for the governing body. I was fortunate enough to work with him, and he was this amazingly brilliant and effective leader, thought partner, and I learned so much from him, and I really credit so much of the work that we accomplish on the transitional committee to Bob and his support. So thank you for raising that, Chair Bornstein. Great guy. I'm so sorry to hear this news. Transitioning back to my report, we have a new member on our governing body. Her name is Deborah Smith. She is a veteran of the energy industry with nearly 30 years experience, and that's in public power in the Northwest. Most recently, she was the CEO of Seattle City Light, And we're really excited to have her. There's no replacement for John Prescott, but to have another well-rounded and experienced member on our team is great for us. Yesterday at our governing body meeting, we heard from the Turlock Irrigation District and Imperial Irrigation District. Turlock, which is already a member of EIM, has committed to join EDAM, and IID is planning to join both EIM and EDAM sometime. I think it's next year. We learn more about their organizations, their service territories, what they do, their load profiles, their generation makeup. And then we had a discussion on the reasons behind their respective decisions to join the Western energy markets. In addition to that, we had a briefing on the Gas Resource Management Initiative. That's well underway. We learned that the electric and gas market timelines are not aligned, and how this misalignment creates challenges for resource operators. The ISO expects to bring this initiative forward for a decision later this year, so flagging it for you now. As you have heard from Roger and from Elliot, the governing body is now operating under the primary authority construct. So items approved by the governing body will be on your consent agenda coming up next, I understand. At our general session yesterday, we unanimously approved the EIM Assistance Energy Transfer proposal. This proposal does two things. One, it removes the December 31st, 2025 sunset provision, and it also creates an exemption from surcharges so that surcharges will not apply to transfers that arise out of directions that come from reliability coordinators. This proposal is supported by Department of Market Monitoring and has broad support from stakeholders. We received positive public comment from PG&E and the Cal CCAs. And also there's a letter of support from Avangrid in your meeting materials. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or add any color to our deliberation from yesterday.
Thank you, Chair Wagner, since we're using formal terms. I think the way this now should work is board members who are interested in the deliberations of the WEM on the issue that's on the consent agenda, or anything else you'd like to ask Chair Wagner, now would be a good time. But particularly if we want to engage on the issue that's on our consent agenda. Any questions? Well, sorry for not supplying more excitement, but thank you, Chair Wagner. And we will then move on to the next item, which is the decision on the consent agenda.
Good. Thank you, Chair Bornstein. Well,
And Roger, before we move on, it occurred to me that, and you've probably thought this through, that because this is on our consent agenda, we do not have a public comment period on it.
that's correct.
So if somebody was going to comment to us, they would have done it during that first public comment period when we say things that aren't on the agenda. Is that the right process?
I think that's the right process, but you know, I'm also flexible and open to if we want to add a public comment and anyone wants to say something, it may not be a bad idea, to be honest with you. This is
Yeah,
all.
maybe we should do that.
Yeah.
We're obviously feeling our way through this new process, but allow and maybe we'll do that right now. I'm luckily this is probably a pretty uncontroversial case, but maybe we will just, Silas, if you could open up for the lines for comment on the item that's on our consent agenda. We'll see if there is any public comment.
Yeah. And before you do that, Silas, let me just note, we did get a public comment letter that was provided both to the board and to the governing body. And I referenced that yesterday for our record, and we'll reference it again today. It was from Avangrid, and that has been provided to both bodies. And Silas, if you can go ahead and check for any public comment on the consent agenda, item number 6.
All right, if you would like to make a public comment, you can please press the raise hand icon on Zoom or #2 on the phone line. All right, we do have one hand up in our queue. Susan Schneider, you've been sent a prompt to unmute yourself. You can please go ahead.
Hello, Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
and thank you,
Yeah, hi.
Susan, for making my suggestion of public comment not vacuous.
Well, and in fact, what I wanted to do mainly, I do have some comments on the agenda item, but I did want to comment on this public comment session. It does make sense, since the first public comment is supposed to be on items not on the agenda, that if something's on a consent agenda, it's still on the agenda. And so it would make sense to have a public comment session. So I wanted to support that here. And also, if when there are letters that the board receives, if they're not posted anywhere, it would be nice if it could be a description of the letters or their content, perhaps a summary of their content, just as a process matter.
I believe the
So-
letters are posted,
Are
but
they
I
okay?
will double check that.
Okay, I didn't see
They
it before, but
should
I
be
may not have
posted.
checked it more recently. So
Although sometimes they come in minutes before the meeting, in my experience, in which case, well, I've expressed my view on that in the past.
Valid, it is a valid view.
okay, excuse me, hello, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because I got a notice that they were lowering my hand in 5 seconds, so I wasn't sure. But
Oh,
anyway,
no, you're still with
if there, and I do understand that you do sometimes get letters close to the meeting time. So I still repeat my request. If you have something that maybe others have not seen, perhaps a summary of the content would be helpful to the discussion. But thanks. That's all the process suggestions I have.
Okay. So Roger, do you want to do a 1-sentence summary, or I could?
Well, sure. I mean, the summary is that, let me just find my notes here. Excuse me. That we do have the consent agenda, as we discussed as throughout the meeting, about the new construct of primary authority. This is the board's, this is the board's chance for approval or not of the consent agenda and the item on the consent agenda. That generally, as a procedure, that I would see the consent agenda is something that, if the board does not have any concerns, that has substantive concerns, I guess is maybe the better way to state it, would have the opportunity to pull it off the consent agenda, have discussion, seek discussion from management or anything it needs in order to help it make a decision. Otherwise, it's sort of a deferential type of an item where the board votes kind of in an almost vanilla, unexciting manner on the consent agenda. If there were more than one item on the consent agenda, they could pull one off, leave the other on. There's various permutations that could happen. So with that, here we have the consent agenda. This consent agenda is for the item that is the WEIM Assistance Energy Transfer proposal that the governing body approved under its primary authority yesterday afternoon. And it comes to the board, and there's an opportunity for board comment, which we have listed in our schedule here. So I would open it up if anyone on the board wants to make any comments, has any thoughts, issues, concerns about this, sort of kind of like you just did, Severin. So, but I'll give one last opportunity, and if there is nothing, or things go swimmingly, then I will move on to a vote.
So I think Susan wanted a short description of the Avangrid or summary, and I think the short summary is they are supportive of the proposal.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that what you were asking?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
But no, that was useful too.
Yeah, and I will say that was, we just looked, and that letter was posted. So,
yeah. And that we have 3 choices at this point. My understanding is we can approve the consent agenda. We can, without discussion, somebody can discuss what's on the consent agenda, or somebody can request to pull something off the consent agenda. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I think the default is to approve the consent agenda. So if any board members would like to comment on it or ask to remove an item from the consent agenda, now's the time. Hearing nothing, then Roger, please take the vote.
Thank you, Severin. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves the July 24, 2025 consent agenda. Is it July 24th or July 23rd? I think we had that. Yeah, I thought
23rd.
so. Well, my copy is incorrect. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves the July 23rd, 2025 consent agenda as described in the memorandum dated July 16, 2025. And can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay. And all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Board of Governors. We have passed our first consent agenda under the new pathway step 1.
Congratulations.
Yeah, well done.
Well, and I appreciate everyone's patience as we do kind of, tiptoe through some of this and learn and develop and all. And so I appreciate the wisdom and the good advice. And we will make sure we add public comment next time we have a consent agenda listed specifically, and we will continue to grow.
Roger, could I just make a quick comment?
Absolutely.
In our viewers should be aware, we do get this information. So we've seen the letters and we've gotten the memos from the staff, and obviously we just had the report from the governing body. The one thing that I'm not finding, but it might be in here somewhere because I'm having a little trouble with my computer today. If there is an actual presentation that is made by the staff to the governing body that goes out in advance of the meeting, could you go ahead and put that in our packet as well? We have the memo. I just don't think we had the presentation. Or maybe we did and I just haven't found it because I'm
it was my understanding that you would have the presentation. So if it is not in there, that was an oversight, but we will make sure we double check that each time. And
No, Jan, it's 13.4.
Okay.
Thank you.
There's my problem. I don't have a 13.4. As I mentioned, I'm having a little trouble with my computer today. Sorry. Mine stops at 3.
No, well, it's always a good reminder. We double, triple check. Sometimes things get missed. We are all fallible. But I appreciate that, and we will make sure we double check for those things. And if we can help you with the computer problems at all, let's reach out offline and we'll get the right people to help you. Okay, back to you, Chair Bornstein.
Thank you, Roger. So next we are moving on to the briefing on the status of the interconnection process enhancements and interconnection queue. And I think I'm turning it over to Neil Miller to introduce the presenters.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair Bornstein. It's Neil Miller here. I will do the introductions. And thank you for the opportunity for this presentation. Today I will, excuse me, I will be asking Danielle Mills, our Principal of Infrastructure Policy Development, and Bob Emmert, Senior Manager of Interconnection Resources, to provide an update on interconnection activities. Danielle will provide an update on our implementation of the interconnection process changes approved by this board and by the Federal Regulatory Energy Commission last year and upcoming activities. Bob normally gives a presentation around this time of year, updating the Board of Governors of the status of resources in the interconnection queue, and that presentation has been folded into this update. I also wanted to thank Danielle, Bob, and all of Bob's team for their outstanding efforts implementing the transformational changes needed to manage the excessive number of applications we have been dealing with. We also know these changes have not been easy for the industry to absorb either, and we do appreciate the industry's continued support as we work through these difficult issues. So with that, I will turn the microphone over to Danielle and Bob, and thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Just checking that everyone can hear me. Good afternoon, governors. Bob and I are here today to provide you with an update on the status of the interconnection process enhancements and the interconnection queue. So I'll summarize some recent reforms that we've made, then turn it over to Bob before I come back and tell you about our next IPE initiative, Interconnection Process Enhancements Initiative. So I'll start with a quick refresh of why these reforms were necessary. You probably recall that Cluster 14 in 2022 exceeded historic levels of interconnection requests and signified increased competition for interconnection in California in order to fulfill procurement orders that were issued. And so at that point, we sought an extra year from FERC to complete the studies of all 373 projects in Cluster 14. The ISO then conducted a survey of interconnection customers prior to Cluster 15 in 2023 and expected similar levels to what we saw in Cluster 14, but instead saw another sharp increase up to 541 projects and interconnection requests. So at that point, the ISO recognized that such competition and interest was not only unsustainable, but was also to some extent counterproductive because studying such volumes resulted in less meaningful study results to interconnection customers. So we launched the 2023 Interconnection Process Enhancements Initiative in 2023. Some of that is still ongoing, but we'll provide you with an update of where things are now. And we've seen, if we go to the next slide, we've seen really great support from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for our interconnection reform efforts. This is an issue that other ISOs and RTOs across the country have also experienced, and each has developed tailored solutions to their own queue issues. But in track two of the 2023 Interconnection Process Enhancements Initiative, we addressed transformational reforms and changes that were needed to the interconnection request intake process. That was to address the number of requests we were receiving. We also addressed a number of queue management issues for projects that remained in the queue and lingered in the queue and could have potentially hindered other interconnections from moving forward. So these reforms were approved in September of 2024 and implemented literally the next day with the opening of Cluster 15 resubmission window. Order 2023 was then approved by FERC in May of this year, in May of 2025. And we view Order 2023 to be sort of the foundational set of reforms upon which we built our other interconnection process enhancements. It established specific study milestones and requirements that we incorporated into the rest of our process. In the fall of last year, we began track 3 of the 2023 Interconnection Process Enhancements Initiative, establishing a process for moving more mature projects and more commercially viable projects forward more quickly through a process that we're calling intra-cluster prioritization. That was approved by FERC in June of 2025, and additional track 3 reforms around the deliverability allocation process modifications will be implemented hopefully in 2027 after we file those with FERC in 2026.
Danielle, I apologize for interrupting. I'm not seeing the slide shared. Did you intend to? Are we having it, or is it a technical problem at my end?
So Severin, this is Christina. I'm sharing. Anybody else having that same issue? Silas, can you see them?
This is Stacy.
I can see the slides perfectly well.
I see the
Yeah,
slides
This is
too.
weird.
see 'em.
Okay. Must have been something I did. Okay, I have them anyway, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, okay, go ahead.
Okay. So the magnitude of these changes, the changes from the interconnection process enhancements was so great that the stakeholder initiative will have taken 3 years ultimately before it's fully completed and implemented. And I'll turn it over to Bob to explain the impact of these reform efforts on Cluster 15 and to provide you with insight as to what is in the queue currently.
All right, thank you, Danielle, and good afternoon, everybody. So the question then becomes, after all of these things were improved and we've implemented the process for Cluster 15, how well did it work? So this table kind of shows the progress of the very beginning stages, where in 2023, when the Cluster 15 application window first opened and we received that 541 projects, with a 347 gigawatts of plant capacity associated with those. That really brought us to having to move forward with the IPE 2023 to make those various changes that we did and Danielle described. So after those changes were approved by FERC and we opened what we called the resubmission window in 2024, that was opened October 1st, 2024, we allowed all the projects that had originally submitted in 2023 to resubmit their projects. They could resubmit them as they were originally or actually make some adjustments because some time had passed. And during that resubmission window, we received a total of 255 projects, a 53% reduction in the actual number of projects and 66% reduction in the actual capacity of those projects. So that was the first step. And that step was part of the reason those reductions were just the new requirements related to the changes we had made. One of those being that we provided some much more information to stakeholders or to developers so that they would know the best places and actually open places to seek to interconnect, where in certain cases, if a project is interested in being available for resource adequacy and there was no capacity available at a particular point of interconnection, they would not be moving forward. So it gave them more information. And so the new projects were better situated, better targeted for where capacity actually existed. Then the next step was to go into what we call the scoring and ranking process, where each project provided scores for a number of different criteria that related to demonstration of their viability as a project to actually be moving forward. So we scored all the projects, we ranked them, and then we ranked them to determine, or within that ranking, determined which of those projects could move forward based on the limitation of that we would study based on the amount of capacity that's truly available on the system to provide to those projects. And from that process, we got it down to 177 projects. So those projects then moved into what we call the validation process. And during the validation process, we're validating the technical data. And we also hold scoping meetings with the projects to go over more detail related to these specific projects now that we have some actual interconnection requests to look at. And we do that in a number of meetings. And following that process, we actually had some additional voluntary withdrawals where projects following the scoping meetings decided that maybe their project really was going to be more expensive or not as well situated as they would hoped. And so in the end, we got down to 145 projects that actually moved forward into a study process, which overall was a reduction of 73% from the original 541 projects and an 80% reduction in the overall capacity that originally came into the cluster 15 queue. One other noteworthy item is that 1/3 of the projects advancing to the queue studies are energy only. Originally, the cluster 15 projects that we received, there were no energy only projects. Everybody was seeking full capacity delivery status for those projects. But under this new process that we developed, I believe we have projects that are really more targeted to what their specific needs are. And so we see that in some cases, a number of renewable projects chose to go energy only and are proceeding in that manner. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So this slide gets to what does the queue look like today? What are the projects that are in the queue? So this looks at the project capacity by technology type for all the projects in the queue, and it's broken out into a few segments of what's in the queue, where in the green shaded area, those are the projects that have been fully studied. The first column in green shows those that are active through cluster 13. Those are projects that have been in the queue for a bit of time, various stages, because it goes back prior to cluster 13 as well. And those projects are going to be projects that either have a power purchase agreement and are moving forward and are in the construction phase, or they've been converted to energy only. So we have a significant amount of projects that are in that mode. And then cluster 14 is the cluster just before 15, obviously, but those are the ones that have been recently completed their study process. They've gone through at least one cycle of receiving allocations of transmission capacity to where that allows them to go out and market their projects with some assurance that if they get a power purchase agreement, those projects can participate in the resource adequacy program. Of the 83 gigawatts in that category for cluster 14, there may be a few that have power purchase agreements, but for the most part, those projects have not received a power purchase agreement yet. So they are, what I would say, are ripe for negotiating with the off-takers, contracts to where they could actually be utilized for resource adequacy for the off-takers that need that. So it shows that there's a pretty significant amount of capacity that has already been studied, ready to move forward in the queue right now, which helps answer the question that we receive fairly often, which is, now that you're doing all of these revisions, are you actually having enough capacity in your queue to meet future needs? And I think the answer to that is pretty obvious in my mind, that we have plenty of capacity to meet future needs of even of those projects that have already been studied. That of that 159 gigawatts of capacity, that's enough to fulfill our need for the next 20 years. So we have plenty of capacity, and year over year, as we open new cluster windows, we'll be adding to that in the queue. And hopefully at the same time, other projects will be moving into commercial operation or withdrawing, so our queue won't become overinflated again. And then moving to the blue column, that's for cluster 15, you can see the number of projects or the capacity of those projects that we just started the studies in June 1 for those projects. So those projects won't have their full studies completed until around November 1st of 2026, but they'll be receiving their first cluster study results around November of this year. And at that point, they'll have a pretty good feel for the network upgrades and the cost of those upgrades and the schedule for completing those upgrades to get a feel for, are these really valuable or valid projects for moving forward in more of a near-term case or more of a longer-term case. So adding all those up together, we have 227 gigawatts of capacity in the queue at this point in time, which is plenty to move forward into the procurement proceedings that are anticipated for the near term and midterm as we move forward.
Thanks, Bob. I also want to note that the ISO posted a summary of Cluster 15 scores for transparency and analysis by stakeholders in early June. We did not draw any conclusions from that document, but we're discussing internally and with stakeholders to see if Cluster 15 scoring trends warrant any need for additional changes to our methodology for how we look at interconnection requests as they come in. At this point, we have not identified any glaring issues needing modifications, but we are exploring that in the scope of a new initiative, which we plan to call Interconnection Process Enhancements 5.0. We're moving to a numerical naming system rather than the multi-year regime that we've been under for the last few years. We're also providing a similar report on the state of the queue to FERC. That is due by August 1st as a compliance requirement from the approval of the Track 2 changes, but really it will include a lot of the information that Bob just presented and that was included in that June report. So I want to just kind of walk you through at a very high level some of the items that we're committing to looking at in the scope of IPE 5.0. We committed to monitoring and revisiting several elements of the process in this next initiative during IPE 2023. We committed to certain elements in IPE Track 2, particularly around the scoring process and the commercial interest point allocation process. As you remember, that was a controversial and rather novel piece. Right now, the data affirms that the commercial interest points were not overly determinative of success in the scoring process, and the scoring information that was released shows really, I think, good variability in scores and room to grow. So room for projects to come in with even higher viability scores in future clusters and for more competition. And we also looked at things like how non-load serving entities could participate in the process and things like that. So we're going to be looking at all of those items in the scope of track of IPE 5.0 and considering whether any modifications are necessary. There were also a number of policy items that were raised but not necessarily finalized in IPE Track 3. So we'll be looking at some of those as well as additional suggestions that we've received from stakeholders over the past several months as we've implemented these processes, and issues that the ISO internally has identified during the implementation process and kind of living through these reforms. I do want to note that by listing the issues that we provided in the scoping document, which was released a few weeks ago, we're not committed to changing every single item that we said we'd revisit. We're following up on those commitments that we made to all of you on the board, as well as to stakeholders, to monitor and revisit if necessary. But the straw proposal will include more thorough analysis of which issues we think do require changes to the actual process. And we're also going to have to balance the scope of the changes that we can take on. We have to acknowledge the just really significant amount of work that the interconnection team, transmission planners, queue managers, and contract negotiators have taken on, as well as stakeholders, and everyone's adjusted to a lot over the last 12 months. So some of these reform measures will take a few cycles to start to pick up on the trends and to start to see the full effect. So we want to leave some of that intact so that we can understand the impact of these changes more fully. But we do plan to work closely with stakeholders in this process and make sure that we are addressing any essential items and modifications that need to be made. Next slide, please. So with this scope in mind, we plan to post a straw proposal on August 1st, and we'll seek robust stakeholder engagement, as always, to help us move a package of reforms forward to bring to the Board of Governors for a decision in March of 2026. And that hopefully will give us time to file those changes at FERC and ideally implement all of them prior to the opening of the Cluster 16 window in October of 2026. And just to conclude, the reformed interconnection request intake process has yielded significant reductions in the size of Cluster 15. We will still need to watch for trends over the next few years to see if the viability of Cluster 15 was improved as a result of our evaluation process. And the ISO is monitoring and will continue to monitor these trends in interconnection, and will consider process changes as necessary going forward, not just in IPE 5.0. The IPE 5.0 initiative will address issues identified in IPE 2023. We're preparing the straw proposal as we speak and still seeking good stakeholder engagement to advance some of these ideas and bring it to you in March of next year. With that, I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. And congratulations to you and Bob and the whole team on what looks like a very successful change in the interconnection process that has really changed the whole landscape of how we do this and made it much more effective. I already see one hand up from Mary, so take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Severin. I echo Severin's sentiment too. I think you guys did a Herculean job. I just have a question about Daniela. Because of this greater efficiency, what's happened to the projects that were in the queue that did not make it? Do you have a sense of how Cluster 15 has shifted in terms of the people that had? What are the people doing who are not part of our projects? Because that's got to be at least half, right, at this point?
Yeah, thanks, Governor Leslie. So are you asking about the projects in Cluster 15 that were not successful and did not advance to the study process?
Yes, yeah, because
you
effectively halved it, right? The number. So I'm just curious, do we have any sense of what happened to all that interest? Do you know where it went?
Yeah, it's a good question. Some of it may still be out there. So those projects do have an opportunity to come back to the interconnection request window in Cluster 16. Or, there's also an option to, sometimes there is sort of a market for queue positions as well. So That does occur, not necessarily encouraging it, but there are other
cute.
pathways that they could be seeking to advance
So they're
their
not
project.
necessarily gone. They could just be seeking a new way to participate.
They are no longer in our queue, but they have an opportunity to come back and reapply.
Got
See
it.
if Bob wants to add to that too.
Yeah, the one thing I would add is that in the process prior to these changes that we made, a lot of projects were coming in using the ISO study process as kind of a scoping mechanism for them to determine how viable their projects really were. There were some interconnection customers that submitted nearly 40 projects into Cluster 15 originally, and wanted to figure out of those 40 projects, which ones did they really want to move forward with. With our new process where we're really trying to judge the viability of projects through a scoring system, and then also limit the number of projects we study based on how much available capacity we truly have, that really helped projects to, well, first of all, it gave them the signal that we're really looking for projects that are really doing their homework before they come into the cluster study process to determine, are they going to be located in an area where there's actually capacity to be had, or would it need to be built? So we actually provided a lot of information prior to the opening of the window to show where the true viable points of interconnections were. And so I think that additional information helped the developers to determine, okay, which really are the best locations to site my project. So it's not like these projects just went away. It's just a matter of they kind of honed it down to, okay, which are the most viable projects that they would bring forward into Cluster 15.
So it was a chance to also regroup to be more competitive next time.
I would imagine that's the case in some cases where their scores may not be high enough, and so they may want to do some additional work to further their readiness. But there are also some projects that they now know are probably not going to be ever resubmitted again, because at least under the current state of the grid, there's just not enough capacity for them to move forward at this point in time.
Got it. Thank you.
Severin, are you talking? You're muted.
And I was telling you that you're muted.
Oh, okay.
No, you're muted.
Well, I was waiting for you to signal it, come off of it.
All right.
I have a quick one. I just wanted to ask, apparently we do this annually. We open up, generally speaking, a new cluster annually for people to come in and request transmission. Is that a requirement from FERC or in our charter or our tariff? And have we considered any other schedule? I'm just looking at trying to get through, even with the reduction, the remarkable reduction, congratulations, that you've achieved on focusing in on the projects that are really important to move through. It's still a lot of work and quite a backlog, in my view, to get through. And I just wondered if we've ever examined maybe changing how frequently we take on new projects when we haven't finished the ones that are already in the queue.
Traditionally, we have opened a new cluster window every year. And while we've had some discussions internally about would we want to change that, when FERC came out with their FERC order number 2023, they continued to require that process of opening an annual window. And actually, they developed the schedule that we would all need to meet in order to stay in compliance with that particular schedule and annual process that they thought was really the best that all of the folks that do studies across the country, the various utilities and ISOs and so forth, should really adhere to that. So at this point, we're pretty much committed to doing this on an annual basis until at some point in time, if we decide something different is more appropriate. But at this time, we're kind of in the mode of let's play this out. Let's see how well this process works now that we've done some significant redesigning of the process. And hopefully we found kind of the sweet spot of how this is going to work moving forward.
It still looks like a huge workload to me, but good on you. And hopefully we'll get through it. Thanks.
Joe.
So my congratulations also to you. This sounds like a very, very successful. And I really appreciate your clarification, Bob, because it seems like we're now providing a lot more information, and this should be a real benefit to a lot of the stakeholders in terms of prioritizing their efforts to where they have a greater likelihood of success. Still, I expect some people were maybe not so happy, but I expect, through each of these cluster processes, some people are not so happy. So can you comment to the sort of the receptivity and, how has the reaction been, for example, in comparison to prior years?
Yeah, I think we're still waiting to see some of the impacts. I mean, we can say by looking at the data that we effectively reduced the cluster. It's hard for us to tell what happened, internally at individual development companies making decisions about which projects to prioritize and to submit resubmissions and things like that. We haven't heard as many protests necessarily or concerns with the process overall. We have had some escalations on specific projects that we've been working our way through and continue to work our way through. And a lot of that is, that's part of the reason that we drew the stakeholder process out into track 3 and are immediately starting track 5 again, because there are still, I think, some modifications that can help smooth this out, not just for us internally, but for stakeholders as well. And just to make the process a little clearer, a little more efficient time-wise and more streamlined so that everyone is working with as much information as possible to get as much certainty as possible as they move through the queue. So I think, we've seen some settling of some of the concern and controversy that we heard right after track 2 was adopted, but there are still issues to fix, and we'll be looking at those.
Well, thanks. And that's very reassuring. So again, congratulations.
Yes, and it's Neil here. I just wanted to add one other point on, just building on what Danielle and Bob have been talking about, which is that we did see this transition and implementation of the new process very much a transitional issue, with the benefit of the additional information being communicated, the framework that we're using to evaluate which projects move forward. We are anticipating that in future cycles, we get applications, the number of applications are more aligned or closer to the amount that we would actually be moving through and studying. This initial transition from a very large and unfettered application process, moving all the way through to implementing these changes, led to a very large percentage reduction overall. In the future, we'd be expecting that stakeholders and resource developers bring in a smaller number of more viable projects from the onset, so that the percentage reduction you see is smaller going forward, that we get initial applications that are closer aligned with the amount that would actually move through the process. So that's our hope, and that the additional information being provided, as well as more experience with this process, helps smooth that out in future cycles.
Thanks. That's very helpful. Thank you, Dean.
And Neil, let me just add, in response to Jan's question, and in case it wasn't clear, that the timing is tariff based. It's FERC requirements. We do have no new cluster window until 2026 as we transition to order 2023, and that has been approved by FERC as well.
Angelina.
Well, great. This is a Herculean effort, and thank you all for the hard work. And yes, Neil, hopefully we'll have much more quality projects going through the process and a smaller percentage of projects dropping off. This has been a steadily improving process right from the beginning, so it's good to see the results, and we'll continue to adapt and evolve as necessary. I just had a very quick question to something that Danielle mentioned. I know initially it was a big problem where people were in the queue just to hold a number in the queue and then, kind of able to sell positions. Is that still continuing? I know we don't encourage it, but you mentioned it, so I figured I'd follow up.
Yeah, yes, I did mention it. Thanks for your question, Governor Galativa. We have seen that. So we as Bob showed, we have about 277 gigawatts in the queue. It's much harder for us, honestly, to address the issue of projects that are lingering in the queue. We did, implement some new changes in in track 2 of the interconnection process enhancements that would seek to move some of those projects along faster, but we don't have a lot of authority to actually withdraw those projects. And so there are still quite a few projects that are sitting in the queue, and those positions can be, bought and sold. The ISO doesn't participate in that, but that is something that happens in the market. And so that's something that we're continuing to watch and think through some potential policy solutions to. It is difficult because we have to be careful not to, we can't try to impose new changes and new policies on projects that are already in the queue under a specific set of policies and have already signed
That's
generator
totally
interconnection
fine,
agreements.
Danielle. Don't worry about it. I'm not saying that we should stop it. I was just curious to what extent it was continuing. I think it's also a healthy side of the marketplace. So as long as it's not disrupting us interconnecting what we need on an annual basis, let the best projects win. So yeah, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Mary.
Yeah, sorry, just a follow-up question. I meant to ask initially, what do you think the impact of the federal tax changes are on these queues? Do you think that these projects have already been established, or do you think they're sensitive to any change in tax law? Thanks.
It's Neil here. I'll start with that and then look to see if Danielle and Bob have anything to add. I think our own impression right now is that the resources that are in our queue, their offtake agreements generally are already building in clauses to provide them some assurance that the any increased impacts on taxes or tariffs would be a flow-through item as opposed to something that would accrue to the developer. But I think the other implication on the tax changes is that we are seeing examination of what can be done from a state level to encourage projects that would be coming on, say, in early 2028, or perhaps as far out as 2029, to see if there's a benefit to moving those projects forward and seeking to get them connected earlier, such that they could still qualify for tax credit relief. But that is a work in progress, so I can't give you more specifics right now. Bob, Danielle, anything to add on that?
I would just add that we've had the question come already. Have we seen projects withdraw because of the changes in policy? And we've only seen one project withdraw after July 4th, and I'm sure it wasn't related to that issue. So it's really just put a focus on really those cluster 14 projects that have been studied and are ready to go, and those are the ones in the best position to move forward more quickly. So I think it just has kind of raised the urgency for developers to work to try to get their projects online, and as well as Neil said, try to work towards getting procurement picked up to where procurement picks up and starts to sign contracts for those ready projects.
Yeah, because that seems like that could have policy ramifications at some point. Be thoughtful about just because of timing.
If I may just add to that a little bit too, the only thing I want to acknowledge is, our process is intended to be very closely linked with the procurement process set forth by the Public Utilities Commission and any local regulatory authorities. So it's an item that has been suggested to be added to the scope of the next interconnection process enhancements initiative, just to continue to watch what the procurement landscape looks like in light of these tax credit expirations, and to the extent that there are process modifications that we can implement in time to consider those.
Yeah, thanks. Good.
And I just have one quick question. The comment that I think Bob noted, that 1/3 of the projects advancing the queue are energy only. My memory is that prior to the enhancements, that was a much smaller share. And that, which means that the decline in the number of projects with asking for deliverability has been much larger. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Originally, the 541 projects that submitted interconnection requests in 2023 were all seeking full capacity delivery status for their project. So it was, I think this transition that we have made with our procedures has really put a finer focus on where should projects, under what mode should they proceed? Because in the past, everybody could seek full capacity delivery status, so you might as well try. So even though projects may be a solar project that might only have a small portion of its project really eligible for resource adequacy, they were still seeking full capacity delivery status. Now we're seeing a trend that a lot of those projects, wind and solar projects, are now going to locations where they are allowed as energy only, even though there's not enough capacity to make them fully deliverable. So I think it's really actually helping them pick the right path at the beginning of the process rather than try to work through the process, fail on getting deliverability, but still move forward as energy only.
Yeah, that seems like another efficiency enhancement that is just a huge success. Congratulations. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. And I have brought it. So I think we are on to the informational reports, which we have staff here to answer any questions if board members have any questions about the informational reports. So I think my next item is to ask if board members have any questions or comments on the informational reports.
Severin, did you want to see if there was any public comment on the transmission?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Any public comments on the interconnection queue enhancement?
If you would like to make a public comment, you can press the raise hand icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen or #2 if you're dialed into the phone only line. And we do have one hand up in the queue so far. Susan, you've been sent a prompt to unmute yourself. You can go ahead.
Hi, this is Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. Can you hear me okay this time?
Yep.
Hi. Yeah, we just wanted to make a brief comment on the interconnection process enhancements, and in particular on the IPE 5.0 initiative. We were very encouraged to see the staff was going to have a further enhancements initiative, because we do think there are some things that need to be looked at and changed. We, in our comments, our written comments on the scoping document, we encourage the staff, and we hope the CAISO will consider a broader initiative than just the things that were listed in the scoping document. We understand the urgency of completing the proposed changes, any proposed changes that would apply to the cluster 16 window in October of 2026. But there are a number of other adjustments, very important adjustments, that need to be looked at in several other items, including some of the newer processes that have been implemented. For example, the transmission plan approved several upgrades and that were removed, technically removed from the cost responsibility of interconnection projects, because once they're approved in the TPP, then individual projects don't have to fund them. But because of the new shared network upgrade posting requirements, they're having to post potentially millions of dollars of security for upgrades they're not responsible for anymore, simply because there has not been a formal report removing the upgrades from their cost responsibility. So it seems like an esoteric thing, but there are other issues regarding standalone network upgrades, the intra-cluster prioritization, several clarifications on that. So there are a number of other items that really do need to be considered, and we hope the CAISO will consider a broader scope, even in a phase 2, maybe considering the interconnection related items first is more urgent, but we do want to make sure that those items are addressed. They're very important and very important to making the other changes that have happened work better. So we hope the CAISO will consider that. I'll take any questions you have. Otherwise, that concludes my comments.
Any questions? Thank you, Susan. Silas, any other comments?
There are no further comments in the queue.
Okay, thank you. And I promise by December, just before I turn over the reins, I'll get it all right. I don't really promise that.
Yeah, don't.
Any comments on the comments or questions on the informational reports? Hearing none, I think I turn it back over to Roger.
And well, I think the last question would be whether there was any future agenda items that anyone wanted to note. And let's just see if anyone wanted to put anything in for that. I don't see any hands. And with that, we can adjourn.